This is the image they tried to bury, a gaping, mud-filled crater where the east wing of the White House used to stand. Yellow construction cranes hanging over the site like vultures circling a carcass. Concrete barriers streaked with rainwater. Exposed rebar jutting from the earth like broken bones. And standing over all of it, a federal judge, a George W. Bush appointee no less, looking a Department of Justice lawyer dead in the eye and saying two words that just shattered the Trump administration's entire legal strategy: be serious. As of this morning, Thursday, February 5th, 2026, the $400 million White House Ballroom project is on the verge of total legal collapse. For the first time in modern American history, a federal court is preparing to order a sitting president to stop building on the grounds of the White House itself. Not a congressional vote, not a public referendum, a single judge with a gavel and the Constitution. Let that visual sit with you. The most powerful man on earth demolished an entire wing of the People's House, ripped out a nuclear bunker built by Franklin Roosevelt during World War II, poured millions in concrete into the ground, and now a court is telling him he may have to rip it all back out. Sources inside the West Wing describe the mood as volcanic. The president reportedly threw a stack of architectural renderings across the Resolute desk when he was briefed on Judge Richard Leon's preliminary findings late Wednesday evening. This is not a construction dispute. This is a collision between presidential power, private money, historic preservation, and the fundamental question of who owns the White House. We are talking about $400 million in private donations from the biggest tech companies on the planet. We are talking about a demolished nuclear command bunker with no replacement. We are talking about a 90,000 square foot hole in the ground next to the most secured building in America. We are talking about a president who told donors he needed zero approvals to do whatever he wanted. In this report, we are going to break down exactly how Judge Leon eviscerated the administration's legal arguments in open court. We are going to examine the financial catastrophe of halting construction mid-project. We are going to reveal what sources close to the Commission of Fine Arts are saying privately about the designs. And we are going to answer the question nobody in the mainstream media wants to ask. If the judge orders the concrete removed, who pays the $400 million bill? Buckle up. The People's House is at war with the man who lives inside it. To understand why this morning feels like the beginning of the end for the ballroom, we have to go back to July 31st, 2025, the day Trump first announced the project. He stood in the East Room, flanked by donors and architectural renderings, and made a grand promise. The new ballroom would seat 900 guests. It would end the embarrassment of hosting state dinners in tents on the South Lawn. It would cost $200 million, all privately funded, not a dime of taxpayer money. He called it a gift to the American people, a beautiful, generous gift. Here is what he did not say. He had not submitted plans to the National Capital Planning Commission. He had not consulted the Commission of Fine Arts. He had not sought a single dollar of congressional authorization. He had not completed an environmental review. According to leaked internal White House communications, the president was told by advisors that as commander-in-chief, he could start construction immediately with, and this is a direct quote from the October donor dinner, zero zoning conditions and no approvals. That advice was catastrophically, legally, historically wrong, and now the bill is coming due. By October 2025, without warning, demolition crews appeared at the East Wing. The facade came down. The iconic colonnade was destroyed. The First Lady's offices were gutted, and beneath it all, the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, the nuclear bunker Roosevelt built in 1942 to survive a direct hit from an Axis bomb, was ripped apart. Construction workers were forced to sign non-disclosure agreements. The White House press secretary called it necessary for a strong and stable structure and compared the demolition to Gerald Ford's swimming pool. When that comparison reached Judge Leon's courtroom on January 23, 2026, his response was devastating. He looked at DOJ lawyer Yakov Roth and said, "You compare that to ripping down the East Wing? Come on, be serious." Here is the legal architecture of the disaster, and pay attention because this is where the $400 million house of cards collapses. The administration's position rests on two pillars. Pillar 1, the president has inherent authority under existing law to repair, alter, and improve the executive residence. Pillar 2, private donations funneled through the Trust for the National Mall to the National Park Service and redirected to the executive residence constitute a legal funding mechanism that bypasses the need for congressional appropriation. Judge Leon dismantled both pillars in a single hearing. On the question of authority, Leon noted that Congress appropriates roughly $2.5 million per year for White House maintenance. The administration argued this statutory language, repair, alteration, and improvement covers a 90,000 square foot demolition and reconstruction project. Leon called this a very expansive definition. He pointed out that Republicans control both chambers. The president could have asked for authorization. He chose not to. On the funding mechanism, Leon was even more brutal. He called the donation pipeline a Rube Goldberg contraption, designed to evade congressional oversight. He found no basis in legislative history for using the Park Service's gift authority to raise $400 million. Ours, his exact words, none, zero. But here is the catch that makes this exponentially worse. The administration's own DOJ lawyer warned the court that halting construction could expose the White House to flooding, structural damage, and security vulnerabilities. The Secret Service filed a declaration stating even a temporary pause would hamper their ability to secure the complex. They demolished the nuclear bunker. There is nothing beneath the construction site except raw earth and temporary barriers. If Leon issues the injunction, the White House becomes structurally compromised. The administration created this trap for itself. They demolished first, asked permission never, and now they are telling a judge the court cannot stop them because stopping them would be too dangerous. Leon's likely response, based on his comments from the bench, is that the danger is of the president's own making. You cannot demolish a building without authorization, claim the demolition creates a security emergency, and then use that emergency as a shield against judicial review. That is the legal equivalent of setting your own house on fire and suing the fire department for showing up. It is a circular argument that collapses under the weight of its own cynicism. When the DOJ attorney tried to invoke national security as grounds to continue construction, citing top-secret underground work, Leon was unmoved. He had already drawn a line in December, allowing below-ground work to proceed, but ordering that no underground structures could dictate the size or shape of the above-ground ballroom. The administration reportedly violated the spirit of that order by pouring foundation work that plaintiff's attorney Tad Hoyer argued would set irreversible parameters for the structure above. The judge is watching, and the data shows he does not like what he sees. Now let us talk about money, because this is where the ballroom disaster becomes a financial hemorrhage of staggering proportions. The project was announced at $200 million in July. By October 2025, Trump revised it to $300 million. By December, he told reporters it would cost approximately $400 million. That is a 100% cost overrun before a single wall has gone up above ground. According to sources familiar with the donor arrangements, at least 37 private entities have contributed to the project. The list reads like a directory of companies with business before the federal government. We are talking about Alphabet, Google's parent company, which contributed $22 million as part of a lawsuit settlement with YouTube. We are talking about Amazon. We are talking about Microsoft. We are talking about Meta, Apple, Palantir, Lockheed Martin, Coinbase, Ripple, and NVIDIA. These are companies with billions of dollars in federal contracts, regulatory decisions, and antitrust exposure before this administration. And they are writing checks to build the president a ballroom. Richard Painter, the former chief White House ethics lawyer under George W. Bush, said there has never been anything comparable in his experience. Virginia Cantor of the Democracy Defenders Fund called it a vanity project that serves no legitimate public interest. But here is what nobody is talking about. If the judge halts construction, who absorbs the losses? Clark Construction and AECOM hold the primary contracts. They have ordered structural steel, bulletproof windows, anti-drone roofing, marble, and onyx that Trump reportedly purchased personally while in Florida. Sources estimate between $80 and $120 million in materials have already been ordered or delivered. Contract cancellation penalties could run into the tens of millions. And because this is privately funded through a nonprofit structure, the donors may have no legal mechanism to recover their contributions. That $22 million from Alphabet, gone. The checks from Amazon and Microsoft evaporated into a mud pit on Pennsylvania Avenue. It gets worse. The original architect, James McCrary, was fired in December amid disputes over scope and scale. He was replaced by Shalom Baranis Associates, who presented revised designs to the Commission of Fine Arts showing a 22,000 square foot ballroom with 40-foot ceilings, 8 floor-to-ceiling windows, and capacity for 1,000 seated guests. CFA Chairman Rodney Mims Cook Jr., a Trump appointee, looked at the renderings and said one word: immense. The footprint extends 300 feet into the South Lawn. The structure would stand 55 feet tall. It would dwarf the existing White House. The National Trust for Historic Preservation's attorney described the president as a temporary tenant of the White House, not the landlord. Judge Leon offered his own correction. He suggested the more fitting word was steward. That single word contains the entire philosophical foundation of what may become the most significant presidential power ruling in a generation. The president is not the owner. He is the caretaker. And a caretaker does not demolish the house without asking the family. Let us push this to its constitutional extreme. The question before Leon is not whether Trump can build a ballroom. The question is whether any president has the unilateral authority to demolish and reconstruct portions of the White House, the most symbolically important structure in American democracy, without the consent of Congress, without oversight commission review, and without public comment. The administration's argument, stripped bare, is that the president can do whatever he wants to the White House because he lives there. If that argument holds, a future president could tear down the West Wing, could demolish the Rose Garden permanently, could build a private tower on the South Lawn. The precedent has no limiting principle, and Leon knows it. Here is the psychological dimension the political commentators are missing entirely. Trump fired all 6 members of the Commission of Fine Arts in October 2025. The same month demolition began, eliminating the independent federal agency that would have reviewed his plans. He waited months to appoint replacements, ensuring the commission lacked a quorum. He instructed the National Park Service to produce an environmental assessment the plaintiffs called woefully inadequate. He told the Planning Commission chairman, who is also a White House official, that aspects of the project were classified. Every institutional safeguard was systematically dismantled before the first wrecking ball swung. Sources inside the West Wing confirm the president has been, in the DOJ's own court filings, intimately engaged in the implementation phase. He is choosing the marble, selecting the onyx, fighting with architects over ceiling heights. For a man whose identity has always been inseparable from his buildings, Trump Tower, Mar-a-Lago, the casinos, the ballroom is not a gift to the nation. It is a monument to the builder, and the potential injunction threatens something far deeper than a construction delay. It threatens the identity itself. Now consider the national security catastrophe, because this transforms a construction dispute into a genuine crisis of defense. The Presidential Emergency Operations Center, built after Pearl Harbor, evolved over 8 decades into a hardened command facility designed to withstand a nuclear strike. It had independent power, water filtration, air systems, secure communications, and an emergency escape route. It was demolished. Sources say the intention is to rebuild it with advanced modern technologies, but the replacement does not exist. Right now, there is no functioning nuclear bunker beneath the White House. Every adversary with satellite imagery, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, can see the crater. They can calculate what is missing. What does Putin think when he sees that the American president demolished his own nuclear shelter to build a ballroom? What does Xi Jinping calculate when the command center that coordinates a nuclear response is a hole in the ground? According to former defense officials, the absence of a functional PEOC is the single most serious national security vulnerability in the continental United States, and the man who created it is telling a judge the court cannot make it worse. The projection of strength relies on the projection of stability. A construction site where a bunker used to be is a billboard advertising American vulnerability to the world. Let us talk about the base, because this is where the political calculus gets dangerous. Trump's core supporters see the ballroom as a bold act of presidential ambition. They view the lawsuit as another attack from the institutional establishment, the same forces that impeached him, indicted him, and tried to remove him from the ballot. The donations to his legal defense have spiked since the hearing. But the independents, the voters who decide midterms, see something different. They see a president spending $400 million on a party room while grocery prices remain elevated and housing costs continue to climb. They see a man who demolished a historic building without asking anyone. The optics of excess are lethal for a populist brand. You cannot be the champion of the forgotten man while building a 22,000 square foot ballroom funded by Google and Lockheed Martin. And then there are the donors themselves. Sources close to at least three major technology companies say internal conversations have shifted from pride to anxiety. These are firms with pending antitrust cases, AI regulation debates, and government contract renewals worth billions. Having their names attached to a project that a federal judge has called legally dubious is not the kind of publicity their general counsels want. If Leon rules against the administration, expect the donor list to become a political weapon. Every congressional hearing, every confirmation battle, every regulatory decision involving these companies will carry the shadow of the question, did you pay for the president's ballroom? History offers uncomfortable parallels, and none of them favor the president. When Harry Truman gutted the White House interior in 1948, he went to Congress. He got authorization. He got $5.4 million in funding through the constitutional process. The project was reviewed, documented, and approved. When Nixon converted Roosevelt's swimming pool into the press briefing room, it was a modest adaptation, not a 90,000 square foot demolition. When the first Bush added security upgrades after the Gulf War, it was done with congressional knowledge and institutional oversight. No president in 234 years of the Republic has done what Donald Trump did in October 2025. No president has demolished a wing of the White House without approval, without review, without public notice, and then dared the courts to stop him after the rubble was cleared. Judge Leon referenced the founders in his questioning. He referenced the intent of Congress. He referenced the principle that the White House is not private property. It is a national institution, an icon, in his words. This is exactly the kind of unilateral executive overreach the framers of the Constitution feared when they designed the separation of powers. The emoluments clause exists for a reason. Congressional authorization exists for a reason. And a Bush-appointed judge is reminding a Republican president of those reasons. The stress test is not whether this ballroom gets built. The stress test is whether the American system can constrain a president who genuinely believes that because he holds the office, the building belongs to him. A YouGov poll from October showed 53% of Americans disapprove of the demolition. Only 24% approve. Even if Trump wins in court, he builds over the objections of the majority. Every state dinner held inside the finished ballroom would carry an asterisk. Built without permission, funded by companies seeking regulatory favors, erected on the ruins of a structure that survived the Second World War and the Cold War only to be demolished by the man who lived upstairs. Representative Jamie Raskin has introduced legislation to remove the White House's statutory exemption from the National Historic Preservation Act. Senate Democrats are preparing subpoenas for donor records, construction contracts, and internal communications about demolition timelines. Even within the Republican conference, sources report private unease about the precedent being set. If Trump can spend $400 million in private money to rebuild the White House without a vote, what stops the next president from doing the same with different donors and different agendas? The argument cuts both ways, and the donors know it. So as we head deeper into February, here is what to watch. Watch for Leon's ruling, expected any day now. If he issues a preliminary injunction halting above-ground construction, the administration will appeal immediately to the D.C. Circuit. Watch for the emergency stay motion. If the circuit refuses to stay the injunction, the cranes on Pennsylvania Avenue go silent. Watch for the donor fallout. Sources close to several major tech companies say they are already expressing private concern that their contributions may become both a political and legal liability, particularly as antitrust cases and AI regulation advance through the agencies they funded. Watch for the Truth Social eruption. The president has already signaled he views this as a personal attack on his legacy. He declared the project too late to stop. He claimed all materials had been ordered. He called the preservationists obstructionists and troublemakers. Expect escalation. Expect executive orders attempting to override the judicial process. Expect the rhetoric to shift from construction to persecution. And most critically, watch the construction site itself. Right now, there is an open crater where the east wing used to be. If it rains, it floods. If it freezes, the temporary barriers fail. The exposed foundation work deteriorates with every day that passes without progress. Time is the enemy, and the judge controls the clock. The ballroom was supposed to be the capstone of the Trump presidency, a 22,000 square foot monument to American grandeur, seating 1,000 guests beneath 40-foot ceilings, completed before his term ends in January 2029. proof that the builder could build even the impossible. Instead, it may become the most expensive hole in the ground in American history. $400 million, a demolished East Wing, a destroyed nuclear bunker, a fired architect, a revolving door of commissioners, a Rube Goldberg funding contraption, and a Bush-appointed judge who looked at the most powerful legal team in the country and said the one thing they never expected to hear: be serious. The foundation is cracking, the walls are not built, the gavel is about to fall, and somewhere on Pennsylvania Avenue, the rain is filling a crater that used to hold the most important room in the free world. Subscribe, stay close, because when this ruling drops, the aftershocks will be felt from the Oval Office to every corporate boardroom that wrote a check for a ballroom that may never exist. This is the ballroom disaster, and the music has not even started.